Well, good morning and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I want to thank Stephanie Mackay in particular, a newly elected member of the Global Interdependence Center Board, for having us, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, serve as host once again for today's critically important discussion on the bottom line of disabilities. You know, we really appreciate the strong relationship we have with the GIC, and we're grateful for the role the organization plays globally to stimulate dialogue about social issues that affect us all, and our diverse communities. This is the third GIC event hosted at the bank since I become president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and I found each one of these topics fascinating and really vital to our thinking about how to serve the third district, this district, the Philadelphia district. You know, minimizing the economic impact that disabilities have on our communities is something I believe that is critical to the overall health of our regional economy. I read some of the recent studies out from the Drexel's AJ Autism Institute. I know the director, Craig Newshafer, is right here with us today. And I was really amazed by some of the latest statistics related to young autistic adults and employment. For instance, less than 1/4 of all young adults with autism are employed within the first 2 years out of high school. Now, where the findings show a big jump in employment 4 to 6 years later, the positions taken are mostly in low-paying, part-time jobs. In fact, only 21% of young people with autism end up working in full-time jobs. Hopefully, today's event will offer you a platform to discuss some potential ideas and solutions that could offer more employment opportunities to those with disabilities. Now, I'd be interested after today's event to hear of ways that the Philly Fed, can serve as a resource to tackle obstacles and brainstorm innovations that can lead to change in this space. You know, as a father of 3 millennials and someone who's spent the vast majority of my career on university campuses, perhaps a silver lining I can offer this morning is that I am very confident that there will be creative problem solvers coming out into our workforce every day from great universities and colleges in our district and beyond, who are eager, absolutely eager, to make their future employers think about investing in social change. And this includes recognizing the unique talents and perspectives that those with disabilities bring to the workplace. And I know you have a great morning here planned, and I'll turn the podium now over to Stephanie, and I know you'll enjoy the discussion. Thanks again for coming.
Hi, excuse me, Stephanie Mackay with Columbus Community Center. I'm the director of development, so I actually do the fundraising, but I'm often on the kind of the front lines in the community, talking to families and business leaders and those in social services and donors, because that's my job, to really raise awareness about disabilities and really try to find solutions at a local level. I became acquainted with the Global Interdependence Center a few years ago through one of the board members, David Kotok, and I had a number of years with him discussing disabilities and how it had an economic impact in our community. And he said, oh yeah, that's fine. That's so nice. Good. You know, pat me on the head and sent me on the way. And over time, I really finally kind of got him to listen, and he started talking to the GIC board, and so they came back to me with a proposal that we have we co-sponsor a GIC event in Salt Lake around disabilities and the impact in the community. And I was there. I had the session set up. I had fabulous speakers from all over, represented by local business leaders in the GIC, and standing at the door going, nobody's going to come to this event. And it filled up with 90 people, which was about 3-4 times more than I was expecting, but community leaders and some very moving presentations by very well-respected people in the community. And I think the success of the event really was represented at the end when 2 past Salt Lake County mayors, who would be government leaders over the largest part of the population of Utah. I couldn't get rid of them. They sat at the table and they just kept talking about these issues. And so I knew we had really hit on something. So we've done another one since then, and I was really pleased. It was a GIC goal to spread this discussion across Philadelphia and Salt Lake, because we have a lot of great things going on both sides. So I'm very honored to be here representing Utah, being here as a newly elected GIC board member. I'm very, very excited about that. And I think we're going to have a great panel today. We're going to have a lot of thoughtful discussions, from the academic to the very, very practical, and the impact on kids and their families. And so I'm glad you're here to be engaged, and I encourage you to continue these conversations outside of this room after we finish up today. So thank you. And Philippa, I'd like to turn this over to you as our host and MC today.
Hi, so thank everyone very much for being here today. Everyone's stealing my thunder. I was going to say a few things about employment among disabled populations, but that's sort of been taken care of. I wanted to say to you that now when David Kotak ever mentions you, he always says, "Oh, Stephanie Mackay." Like, yeah, you got him where you wanted. So our first actual speaker is Jack Markell, governor of Delaware, and also the state was recently voted to be the best state for young people who are on disability to transition into the labor market. And that is the most important thing that we can do. I do economic research, and that's been identified over and over again as the place to make the difference. So you can't do any better than that. It's all yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. Happy I want to thank President Parker, who regency Delaware's relative loss. Fantastic job at the University of Delaware president. And very close together, and it's great to so the first three speakers, like all Delaware event here, Northville, the 14 years ago, I was not governor at the time. I visited one of the Delaware players who was good supporter of people with disabilities. It was a bank.
Thank you very much.
It was a bank, and I met a young man who he's 25 years old. He had Down syndrome, and his job at the bank, they made a lot of promotional materials for their marketing campaigns. And he was making T-shirts, and he was really, really excited to have this job. And he told me all about it. And I asked him, I said, "What did you do before you got this job?" And he said, "I sat at home for 6 years watching TV with my parents." And a light bulb went off in my head about the profound improvement in this young man's quality of life, because he had a reason to wake up every day. He had a purpose to get dressed, to go to work, to be part of a team, part of something that was bigger than himself, and he even earned a paycheck. And I also thought about the profound improvement in the quality of life of his family, because he wasn't sitting at home, frankly, getting depressed, sitting in front of the TV, eating junk food, and they didn't have to be there with him all the day sort of watching this. And I stored this in the back of my mind, and I said, if I ever have the opportunity in any kind of real way to work on this issue, I want to work on this issue, because there are so many people across the country with disabilities who want to work, who can do a great job, who can add real value, but they're not often given the chance. And we need to change that. So years later, I became chair of the National Governors Association. And in that role, there aren't any actual perks to being the chair of the National Governors Association. But you do get to choose one issue for all of the governors to focus on. And without any hesitation, the issue I chose was employment for people with disabilities. And we spent a year really digging in to this issue. And we had at the table representatives from every imaginable disability. self-advocates and others, learned a lot and came out with a number of recommendations. And since it's a governor's organization, the focus was on coming up with ideas that governors could implement in their states. And I'll mention them briefly at a very high level. What we learned, most importantly, is that when you focus on the ability rather than the disability, you can accomplish amazing things. And that has to be, really the spirit in which you engage in all of these activities. But one of the things we found is that we think in so many ways the system that has evolved over a long period of time in terms of the relationship between government and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and our employers is not really structured very well, because the way it tends to work is the people in the divisions of vocational rehabilitation go to the employers and say, do me a favor and please find jobs for these people with disabilities. And a much better way is for the people at the Department of Labor to really become thought partners with the employers, to say, I want to understand your business at a pretty granular level. I want to understand the needs you have, what kind of talent you're trying to recruit, and I'd like to bring you a number of candidates who will represent, a lot of different backgrounds and perspectives. And by the way, some of them are going to have disabilities and they can do a great job. So that was one important insight. The second important insight, this has to be a lot more than government talking to businesses. This has to be about businesses talking to each other. And one of the opportunities I had early in this tenure as the chair of the Governors Association, I went down to meet with Tom Harkin, who, of course, widely recognized as really the hero of this community over a very long period of time. He invited me to a meeting with the CEO of Walgreens up in Connecticut, and where a lot of CEOs were gathered. And we gathered in Connecticut at outside, not far from the airport in Hartford, because Walgreens has a distribution center there, and they've got, as you can imagine, distribution centers all over the country, and they measure everything about the performance of their distribution centers. And they wanted to test the proposition that if they had a distribution center staffed largely by people with disabilities, that it would do really well in comparison with the other distribution centers. And they chose two, the one in Connecticut and one in South Carolina. And they both did really, really well. And so the CEO of Walgreens that day when I was there told all the other CEOs, big companies, and there's some medium-sized companies too, he says, we employ people with disabilities not out of charity, but because it's in the best interest of our shareholders. And we think that's a really important message for CEOs to hear from other CEOs. And so that was a second big insight. We could never bring this to scale if the private sector is not fully engaged, and they need to be talking to each other. The third thing is that states have to walk the walk. We can't just encourage the private sector to employ people with disabilities. We've got to do it ourselves and prove that it works. And one of the people that I had the opportunity to meet during this whole process, Joyce Bender out of Pittsburgh, it looks like some heads nodding, amazing work in terms of sort of search consultant for helping employers find people with disabilities. And what she said to me, she said, within the federal government, the National Security Agency is the biggest employer of people with disabilities. And if the National Security Agency can do it, so can everybody else. And so we think it's really important that governments walk the walk. And then the last, this issue that Philippa mentioned, is we've got to do a better job of preparing young people with disabilities for an expectation of a life of employment and not an expectation of a life on public support. And we still have work to do, but we think it's a really important initiative and something we focused a lot on. So that's sort of our general approach, and one of the reasons I chose this initiative at a time when politics is so polarized and everything is so partisan. This is an issue that absolutely cuts across party line, and I had confidence that I'm a Democrat, but that Democratic and Republican governors alike would embrace this issue. And what you found across the country, some folks who I don't really have a lot to agree with on other issues have really embraced this issue. Scott Walker in Wisconsin has really done a great job with this. Terry Branstad in Iowa, Dennis Dugard, governor of South Dakota, have done an awesome job on this issue, and a lot of others as well. I want to talk about one particular initiative that I am especially proud of. About 5 years ago or so, I was reading a blog entry on the New York Times about a guy in Denmark who was on the fast track in the IT industry in Denmark. and he had a son who was 2 years old at the time who was diagnosed with autism. And having a son with autism was not really in the life plan for this IT executive. And the more he learned about autism, the more concerned he got about his son's future. And he left his job in the IT industry in Denmark and decided to create an organization that was going to devote itself to helping people on the spectrum find jobs in the tech industry. Because a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people on the spectrum can do very well when it comes to data testing, software analysis, and the like. Well, to make a long story short, Torkil Sona, who you're going to hear from in a moment, is now living with his family in Delaware because I called him. And I said, I want to learn more about what you're doing. And I was like blown away by what he was doing. And you will be too when you hear from him. And so he is now in Delaware. I had what turned out to be a really good idea, and I brought him in and I introduced him to leaders of the Delaware business community, including Ernie DeAnastassis, who you will also be hearing from, who runs a regional information technology firm. And sometimes, you run into these business leaders who just get it. And Ernie actually flew to Denmark to sort of check it out and to meet Torkil, and he was so excited by what he saw there that Ernie and Torkil have partnered. And now in Newark, Delaware, if you go down on any particular day, you're likely to see a bunch of young people with autism who have applied and been vetted and are now training for jobs in amongst local employers. And so far, more than 50 have been employed. And Torkil is now working across the country. And thanks in large part to what he has demonstrated, we are seeing such exciting movements. So in the case of Ernie and his IT firm, he's made a commitment that quite a large number, a couple of % of his employees will be people with autism. SAP, the global software enterprise firm, has made a similar commitment. I think 1% of their consultants over a period of few years will be people with autism. Last year, Torkil was a featured guest at the United Nations, right, with the Secretary General, because really focusing on this issue of providing employment opportunities for people with autism. So we have been blessed. And now Torkil is working across the country, including in Utah and a number of other states. And it's good public policy. We love good public policy. It's frankly just as good, even better than good public policy, is when you meet these people. And you see the progress that they have made. And you meet their families, whose lives are fundamentally transformed because their loved ones are now working. It's not easy. In fact, it's hard. And, there are going to be lots of bumps in the road between here and sort of where we ultimately get. But it's really, from my mind, because of visionaries like Torkil and Ernie, that we have an opportunity to really move the needle and to make a profound difference in the lives of so many people with disabilities. So to me, this is just an issue of real passion. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done with the leadership of these two. So thanks for having me today. Am I supposed to introduce one of them? Well, he is the man who needs no introduction. So, and he Torkil, as you'll see in a second, it's a very quiet way about it. But he's one of these people, sort of like E.F. Hutton. When he talks, please listen. And he's got some amazing insights to share, and I hope he will share them with you now.
Well, thank you. That was an extraordinary introduction, I must say. I hope I can live up to the expectations. Yes. So thanks everyone for coming today. It's thanks to the Global Interdependence Center and to Pat Parker and the Federal Reserve. It's so important that we talk about employment and we talk about talent and autism, and not just about autism, because I think we have to change the way we talk about people who are not mainstream people, because that is actually what the business sector needs a lot of right now. And then we know that there may be some things that need to be adapted, but if the will is there, we can find a way. I think we have proven that many times. So it all started with my youngest son, Lars. When he was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. And my wife and I were very surprised. My wife is in the audience today, right there, Annette. And because at home, where he was in his comfort zone, he was very much like his older brothers. He's a smart guy, trustworthy, caring, everything you could want from your child. But in the kindergarten with 30 to 40 kids, high activity level, adults who wanted him to play social games all the time, he was seeking the quiet corner, the swing in the garden. But there are not many quiet corners in kindergartens today. So what they saw was a kid outside his comfort zone. And it was another kid they saw. And frankly, it must have been like a war zone for this kid and for many other kids in kindergartens today. So we were told, we were introduced to autism, and he got a diagnosis. And that was really a life-changing moment for us. We had a lot of things to consider, to understand, and many parents like us went through different phases of how to relate to such a life-changing new situation. But actually, we realized that Lars is the same today as he was yesterday, the day before the diagnosis, and probably what he would be in the future. He's the same guy. He is still the happy, smart, caring guy. And that's just what we have to adapt to. And then try to understand his world and get off from there. But it's not about autism. It's about dandelions. That may be the breaking news of today, this conference. The dandelion is loved by kids. They blow dandelions, they make fun, they make necklaces. But as you grow older, something happens. And if you buy a house with a garden and you see the wonderful flower again, probably the love has turned to hate. Because now it's an annoying weed. You want to get rid of it because you only want the flowers that you have decided in your garden. And your lawn should be as perfectly green as your neighbor's. The flower is the same, but you have changed. Your own norms have been replaced by society's norms. But what if you look at the flower as you would do as a kid and see it for all its virtues? What if you take the flower from the lawn, put it in your kitchen garden, treat it well? You'll find out that it's one of the most valuable plants in nature. It can pay you back so much: nutrition, natural medicine, coffee, tea, wine, beer. It's very productive. I know. I met a farmer in Denmark who makes a living out of growing dandelions. Just imagine, treating it as an herb instead of a weed, making a living out of it. This is what we should all do. We should look at people who are different as if they were herbs rather than weeds. But what is a weed? A weed is a plant in an unwanted place. If you can create an environment where they will be seen as wanted, they turn into herbs. This is our philosophy. Our ambition is not to change the flower, but to change the environment, to make it go from unwanted to wanted. And this is the same with people. So I have 3 sons. We have 3 sons. The 2 oldest ones, they were blown away from home early. They landed in friendly ground because they have the social skills as well as many other skills. But Lars, he should have the same chance. But he would only get that if we could fertilize the ground. So instead of changing all these people, we should change the ground. We should make a system change. That's what we're in for. This is why we use the dandelion as our logo, to remind everyone that there's also an herb perspective when we hear about weeds and cost and crisis. There's also an herb angle. So when you go away today, please remember that. There's always an herb angle. Is it a weed or is it an herb? Is it unwanted or wanted? The powerful message is it's up for every one of us to decide. We can all decide if we want to see the weed or the herb. These guys, they are participants in the Specialisterne Youth Education in Denmark. They competed in a robotic competition, the European Space Agency robotic competition. They won in their age group. They have a disorder, they have a disability, but they won a European championship in robotics. I think we should all consider how we see disability, ability, weeds, herbs, because maybe if they were not given the chance in an environment like our youth education, you would not have unfolded these skills. But if you put them in a comfort zone and let them find their self-confidence, and you can start unfolding the abilities, and suddenly you can talk about great special abilities. And the business sector, there are many business people in the room today. I think you would be happy to have the chance to get some of these talented people into your workplaces. And I know that many companies are also happy to make the adjustments more to get access to the talent, as Governor Markel said. It's all about the talent, and that's what business understand. And they would also understand that sometimes it will take some adjustments, but the talent is there. So specialisterne is Danish for the specialist. I'm the one to blame for this strange name, specialisterne. We call it specialisterne the specialist because we want to provide an alternative to the generalists. The generalists have all the favors in the labor market today, those with the good social skills and so on. But if we could establish comfort zones in the work zones, we could provide some really good opportunities for specialist kind of profiles in the labor market. Our mission is to enable employment for autistic people through innovation, collaboration, and knowledge share. Our vision is a world where people are given equal opportunities in the labor market. There are laws, there are UN human rights, and there are all kind of decisions that politicians have decided upon. But there's also often a stretch from making a decision and put it in real life situation. And we would like to help going from the right decisions to the right implementations. We work based on values like respect, that we're all different, and that's good. That will make your company become better at understanding your clients who are all different. It's also, don't expect less, even though there's a person with a formal disability or disorder. Expect the same. Sometimes you will get even more. Accommodation, it's very important that we create the comfort zone in the work zone. So we ask our employers, our clients to work with us in understanding what's the needed accommodation. Many have sensory issues. It could be light, it could be sound. There's always a solution. Maybe people can work 30 hours instead of 40. That should also be okay. Sometimes you get the same in 30 hours than you would in 40. Clarity is perhaps the biggest ask we have for clients. Say what you mean what you say. Set expectations clearly. Don't use irony, sarcasm, because it can be hard to figure out when you mean what you say and when you mean the opposite of what you say. So why not make it simple and say what you mean what you say. Accessibility is access to guidance when needed. Respect, accommodation, clarity, accessibility. It's simple, it's good management, and it will help many work environments become better work environments, not just for autistic people, but for many of the employees there already. People on the autism spectrum are very different. So it's very hard to say what are autistic people good at. But generally, we see a good memory, pattern recognition skills, attention to detail, high accuracy in repetitive tasks, but also innovative ways to find solutions. And and then there's also a vulnerability that comes often with autism. So you really have to be good, you have to be curious, you have to see these people from an urban angle and work with us on that. We have, in the US, we started a 4-week model for how to find the right people, the right talent for the right job description, the right profile for the right managers. And we have a 4-week assessment program where we assess based on a competence model we developed together with Deloitte. We assess motivation. We have to make sure that the autistic people are there because of their own motivation, not the parents. Motivation, I can see some parents today, parents nodding. I'm a parent myself. And it's really important, dear parents, please stay in the lobby. We need to see the motivation from the individuals themselves. And if we can find a motivation that is kind of close to what their special interest in is, and a job that could lead to a career where you can go from your motivation and drive that into something that has a big value in the marketplace, that's our ideal. We assess workability. So the ability to get to work on time, be comfortable with managers and colleagues, keep your deals. We assess professional skills that are related to the job profile. So if the task is to find jobs for Microsoft, probably there'll be some high requirements on IT. We assess the specialist skills, so everyone are different. So how's your profile on memory, attention to detail? How do you like repetitive tasks? Because not everyone do. We need to know what could be the edge for this individual in the workspace. And then we assess shared skills. That is the areas that are normally regarded to be most difficult for autistic people. It's about teamwork. It's about business development, project management. And we use Lego Mindstorms robots a lot because it has to be fun. When it's fun, you often forget all the barriers. And we use an agile development framework called Scrum that is very much used in the IT space. It's about rapid, flexible development, how to be agile in the workspace. Often that's also seen as a challenge for autistic people. But we believe that if we can explain what are the expectations, what are the rules, what are the roles, then autistic people can take part in teamwork. And we've proven that many times. We work with big companies like Microsoft, Hewlett Packard, SAP, as Governor McKell mentioned. We actually work with SAP in, I think, 8 countries by now, and growing. So their ambition is 1% of the workforce by 2020 should be autistic people. And here in the US, we had CAI as our founding partner. You will hear from Bernie Dianastasis in a short while. And right now we are planning workshops, pilots for Willis Towers Watson, who are here today. Tim, please raise your hand. And for EY, Robin. Yes, Robin are here today. So we are in the early phase of pilots with EY. We have been working with Towers Watson in New York for a while. And we have JP Morgan Chase over here. Yeah. So we actually have a lot of evidence. I hope turn out as positive evidence that this really works. We have experience from 15 countries by now, because people on the autism spectrum are different, but somewhat the same all over the world. But the big barrier really is the way you think about people and the way the HR, the recruitment is set up today. And I would like to show you a video of how the job application process could be for an autistic person. Oops. So this is really the biggest challenge today, I would say, is how do you, if you are autistic, how do you transfer your talent in a way that is understood by recruiters in a company? And if this guy succeeded to get a meeting with a recruiter, probably the first part of the recruitment interview is really to find the chemistry, to say funny things that then can create a good atmosphere. But if you say something ironic to get the good atmosphere going and the autistic person bails out, then you'll never get to the part where they can talk about what they're good at. And this is what we ask our corporate clients to trust us with. Let us find out what they're good at. Let us go through the 4-week assessment and find out what's the profile, what could be the best possible match for you. How do we set up a support structure that will remain your investment in onboarding an autistic person and ongoing success? How do we train the managers, HR, colleagues, and so on, of understanding this person as a very talented person? So you could say it's a 4-week recruitment process that we take people through. There are many stakeholders who have an interest in bringing on board autistic people. There are so many unemployed people. Pat Harger talked about some numbers today. But there's also a huge, huge need in the business community. And I think Stephanie Mackay is a good testimony of the situation in Utah, for example, almost 0% unemployment rate. Utah is bringing people from other states to fill the jobs. And Utah has the second highest rate of autism. So what if we looked with a if we looked from an herb angle, maybe we could find a lot of the talent in Salt Lake City and in Utah and put them into jobs, make them taxpayers. That would make Governor McKell's colleague in Utah happy, I'm sure. Yeah. So we have stakeholders on the demand side. We have large employers, medium-sized employers, small employers, who all have an interest in talent. That is the language of the business. Talent, but competitive employment. And some people autistic people can get a job like Microsoft. Some people, that will take a university, college degree, and maybe some years of experience. Some may never get through high school. Some maybe because they've been too smart for their teachers and are seen as challenging. Some have medium or below medium IQ, but there are also jobs for these people. And I think in Delaware, together with CAI, we have a lot of job experience at different, could say, IQ level, different requirements. Some will take a college, university degree. Some high school is fine. Some drop out of high school. Okay, let's learn the individual a bit more. It's about finding the right job for the individual, because you can bring in so much joy of work. In particularly for not just autistic people, but people with disability, because given the chance, as you say, Governor McKell, let's give them a chance, and they would maybe turn out to be your most stable, loyal, best performing employees. On the supply side, it makes a lot of sense to bring autistic people into the workplace for individuals who very often have big career opportunities, but won't make it with the recruitment interview. So they deserve a career opportunity just as anyone else. The families, where most families, they fear for what will be the situation when the parents are not able to support their autistic kids anymore. Education providers, a lot of investments are being done in educating autistic people, but the better the education, the bigger the cliff is after education and trying to get into the workplace. Local governments, who I think really need to provide as much welfare for the population as possible, and jobs are really a key for realizing your potential. But there's also a lot of economy in this, and being here at the Global Interdependence Center and the Federal Reserve, I'll share just a report that PricewaterhouseCoopers did for what we're doing in Australia for HP. They estimate that for every person we can onboard in a role, in a job like a software tester for HP, the government will experience an improvement in the GDP of 4 million Australian dollars. That's about $3 million US. That's for one person. We had 35 people now onboarded for HP in Australia. That may be almost 100 million US dollars. My goodness. Pat. I know you talk about billions most of the time, but I think that's pretty impressive. And I think there are reasons to believe that such an effect could be realized also in the US and in Europe and other similar organization. So I would love to have that discussion with Global Interdependence Center, because it's big. It's not just about a few jobs, it's also about the local economy, I would say. Policymakers trying to help the companies facing a demographic challenge of many people aging. Many of the jobs are in the high-tech sector, so how can the lawmakers prepare better supply of talents for the businesses? Social entrepreneurs and NGOs who really are dedicated to make a positive quality of life for people with disabilities or autistic people. And social investors who want to invest with a triple bottom line. It has to be a return on investment financially, it has to increase the quality of life for the individual, and it has to have a social return on investment for the society. And I love the word global interdependence. Everyone are talking about being independent, but no, it's really about being interdependent. I love it. And I also feel that we are kind of living that global interdependence, because probably 1% of the global population would be on the autism spectrum. And everyone had two parents, so, and have siblings and have grandparents, so it affects a lot of people. And right now we are active in very many countries. Started up in Brazil, Australia last year, but there's only a part. I've been approached by parents in almost 100 countries, and when parents contact me and ask me to come and help in their country, I cannot say no. I can say, be patient. We'll find a way. Our global goal is 1 million jobs, and our goal in the US is 100,000 jobs. And the timeline is 10 years from now. So that will take some global interdependence. That will take all stakeholders getting together. And as Governor Merkel said, the UN is also very active in this space. And I took part in the planning of this last year's UN World Autism Awareness Day, where the governor was sitting next to Ban Ki-moon, the General Secretary, and the General Secretary announced the call to action. This year, I'm pleased to launch an employment call to action, inviting businesses to make concrete commitments to employ people on the autism spectrum. This is not just about our kids with autism. It's about societies, it's about the local communities, it's about the national community, and it's going global now. And the UN has, all member states have committed to sustainability development goals, where goal number 8 is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And it's not just about autism. It's about everyone who are sorted out because they're not mainstream people. They should also have a chance. And if we think the dandelion way, hopefully we can make people of all types and shapes more kind of interesting for the companies. And I'm very happy to be a Delawarean. And as Governor Merkel said, he called me. He said, come over here. I'll set up meetings with the local stakeholders, and you chaired the meetings personally. Thanks for that. And there was a wonderful buy-in. And it's the first time that we've seen a political leadership like that. And I think that this is really unique and special, and we appreciate it so much. We sold everything in Denmark, my wife and I, and took a chance, moved here. But it paid off. We felt very welcome here, and you'll see from maybe the first meeting with my son Lars, the governor, and myself, because we had many contacts from the US, but we needed a foothold, we needed a community, and I think Delaware has been the right place to get the foothold, get the local community working together, and then make that a model for the rest of the US. We have the vision, we have the concept, it has been tested many times, we have the track record. And now I think we should see not just Delaware, but the Delaware Valley, because there are 7 million people in the Delaware Valley. And if 1% theoretically are on the autism spectrum, that's 70,000. Now they are not ready for employment, all of them. Some are in the school system, some are taught at home by parents. They are all different places, and I think that this is one of the obstacles we see today. Theoretically, there are very many autistic people, but how do we find them? How do we help them develop their talent? How do we, together with parents, kind of encourage to think career, not just to get them in a situation where they'll be taken care of, but really to realize their career? How do we work with educators, with Voc Rehab, with other state agencies? It really takes a community. We've done it in Delaware. We'd like to do it in all the Delaware Valley and the rest of the US. So we're here together today in the mid of Delaware Valley. We are all the stakeholders, or some of the really relevant stakeholders here. There are family members, there are businesses, there are people from the state. There's people who have different focuses, economic, personal. There are teachers whose job is to make the most of the talent and bring them into employment. And I think it's all a matter of setting a goal. We can do it. I cannot see anything that cannot be done based with the right involvement from the stakeholders. So I hope that after this event we can get together again and set a goal. Our goal for the US is 100,000. What should it be here? It can be from 50 that we have already. It could be 5,000. It could be more than that. With 70,000 potential autistic people in this region, it's really up to us to set the goal and realize the potential. Thank you.
So I'd like to say you forgot one thing, which is you said in one of your other talks that people in these companies have come to you afterwards and thanked you for the directive about clarity, because not having sarcasm actually improved the workplace for everyone. So, and I also think of specialists. I take the Sterne from German and the special stars. So I do want to say that one of the things that our next speaker, Ernest Anastasis, is known for is his entrepreneurship. One of the reasons that the current expansion has been a little weak is that entrepreneurs just haven't been able to step up to the plate the way they should be able to. There's some misunderstanding. A lot of people think that it's small businesses that generate jobs, but it's the young businesses. They're responsible for about 30% of gross job gains. They also fail at a horrifying rate, but actually that's good in terms of reallocation of resources. So I think it's fantastic that he will be working in an area where there's going to be a lot of experimentation, a lot of things are going to fall by the wayside, which is great. So would you like to come up and take over?
have to chuckle when Torkel said, I'm a Delawarean. And it's Romeo Arnold saying, California. But it's great. I'm the third leg of the Delaware stool here this morning. And we've got the leadership, political will of the governor, Torkel's innovative vision. And one of the things I really worked hard to do working with them is how do we make it real? And how do we really try to push forward and make it a success? And that's what we've worked very hard at over the last few years. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. You know, it's interesting. A few times in your life, and only a few times in each person's lifetime, a special opportunity presents itself to you. Sometimes you don't even know it happened until a year or two later, and you say, "Oh my gosh, you know that I didn't realize it, but there was a great opportunity there." Then other times you do know it, but either the change is too great, or there's too much going on and on your plate that you don't go after it. And when this opportunity presented itself to me and to our company, I'm just so grateful. This was a few years ago. So grateful that we chose to go after it. And more on that in a minute. But let me just tell you just briefly who CAI is. We're a global information technology consulting and systems outsourcing and systems integration company, and we focus on helping our customers drive productivity and market share through IT best practices and IT innovation. We have over 4,500 associates based in the U.S., and we did over $500 million in 2015. Our founder, Tony Salvaggio, really set this as our goal when we were founded in 1981, and I've been with the business since 1984. But the goal was to become the premier software development, testing, and support organization in the world. Now, we do a lot of other things today, 30 years later, but we still drive to this vision and this passion of really being world-class in delivering IT services. We're over 30 years old. We have 35 domestic and global locations. We're in China, in Shanghai. We're in the Philippines, in India, Canada, and Europe. So we have become a global company, but at the same time, we've got a very, very strong focus on serving our local communities and serving the markets that we serve in the U.S. We've also had a very long-term commitment to disabilities through organizations like Easter Seals and others for many years. So let's talk a little bit now about that wonderful opportunity that came my way. And again, you heard from the governor, who just through his vision, you know, it's so wonderful that he followed up and called Torkel in Denmark when he read his story. And when Torkel, I had heard from the governor and from his cabinet secretary, Rita Landgraf, who's also terrific, of Health and Social Services, and they said, "You've got to meet this guy who's coming to the States." And I'm so glad I came to that meeting. Torkel came and talked about his vision that you just heard about creating 1 million jobs worldwide. And I immediately realized that what he was doing was a stroke of genius. He was building a model to help an underserved labor pool of people, not just to become employed, but the stroke of genius is that they actually thrive in an industry starving for competent technical professionals. So, you know, in our industry right now, a lot of work gets sent to India and to other countries. Here's an opportunity where, as the governor talked about, there's young adults sitting in their basement playing Xbox or watching TV with their folks through a big part of their adult lives, and here's an opportunity to just enable a very different labor model, and in an environment where these folks can be highly successful. So over the next 9 months, my team worked very closely, and Torkel went back to Denmark. We started using Skype. Our team started talking. I went over to Denmark to see what he was doing, and we worked and developed a model that would work for CAI, that would enable us to find, assess, train, and employ individuals on the spectrum. And since we deployed that model a few years ago, we've now employed over 54 people on the spectrum, and I think we're just getting started. We're adding 10 more in February. We have a lot of plans for significant growth this year. And if you look at how this kind of works, again, the state and the governor walked the talk, and not only brought the conversation together and the focus on this, but they also became the first customer to try this, and it was the Department of Health and Social Services. And I'm also very happy that we then began to take it not just from the state, but into the private sector. And I'm very happy that James Mahoney's here from J.P. Morgan Chase. They're a very strong partner of ours, and we've been working together just over the last year in doing a very similar thing. So we have found, and if you look at, Torkel talked about the Lego Hangout sessions. What we've done in Newark, in our facility, is we've set up a whole section of the facility really to focus on this partnership. And so we have the training room, the training capability. We've got the rooms where we're doing the pilot projects, as well as just a very comfortable space that is customized for this type of a project. And what we found is that the CAIers we've hired who are on the spectrum are highly competent in the technical work that we assign them, including programming, software testing, data entry. In addition to that, they're very focused, they're honest, they're loyal, hardworking, and genuine. I mean, what else is an employer interested in their workforce? And they have also had a very positive effect on the rest of the CAI workforce, and in terms of our culture and in terms of the impact they make to our culture. So it's a home run. One of the things that we've been that I think is important is these individuals get out and they work on these assignments. We also work with our customers to then have the folks on the spectrum have a chance to go onto the customer site and do work, and ultimately have an opportunity to have a subset of those employees get hired and join our customer organizations that we're providing services for. So there's an opportunity to go end to end with this model and give folks an opportunity to get out and get placed into organizations. We continue to then just feed that engine and bring in more resources and position them for success. This is the facility in Newark, Delaware. It's right next to the University of Delaware. And we work very closely with the university not only when Dr. Harker was there, but continue to. And as I said, we've dedicated a whole section of the facility to this partnership with Specialist Sterna. I mentioned this already, but I think this is important. It was like Torkel's job application that he just showed a few minutes ago. It's so true. These individuals every one of these attributes apply. And this has been our experience, is that they have been model employees that any organization would want. These are the types of roles or jobs or skills that we believe apply here. And as you can see, it's a wide range of activity. And so there's tremendous hiring opportunity here for everybody, because most companies are doing one or more of these things. Who isn't doing one or more of those things? So I think if just, in terms of summarizing why this is important, it's a great thing to do for individuals on the spectrum. It's an underserved labor market. We worked very hard on this model, and I think, but the most important thing, and it gets back to the governor's theme when he was head of the NGA, this is not about charity. This is about a better bottom line for organizations. This only works because it works for our business. We do lots of charity work as an organization, and folks volunteer to many different nonprofits in our organization. We continue to do that. This is different. This is very unique. This is the intersection of an opportunity to help an underserved labor market, but also enhance the strength and the success of our business, and it absolutely does that. What I'd like to do is show you just a 3.5-minute video clip of a piece that WHYY, who all of you I'm sure know here from this market, is the television station, came down to Newark and they did a piece with us, and it kind of shows, it gives you a little taste of what it looks like, the actual operation, and how we've set things up. And let me just show you that.
So the first is Craig Newshafer, who's the director of the Drexel Autism Institute. The second is Stephanie Mackay, who I have already met. And the third is Joseph Guzzi from the Non-Traditional Career Services and Training. So each one will give us a talk, and then we're going to put together a Q&A with speakers from the first panel as well. So turning it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks to GIC and the Fed for hosting us. We heard from thought leaders and dynamic innovators, and now you get to hear from a professor. So I'm here to talk about research. I mean, I was going to say I was here to get you excited about research in this area. That may be a little too ambitious, but I think what I'll be able to succeed on is hopefully helping you understand the importance of doing more and embedding and integrating research in what we're innovating in the area of employment for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. So that's my goal. I just want to acknowledge at the top, the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute is a fairly big place. It has separate program areas. We have a program area dedicated to what we call life course outcomes, where we focus on research related to employment, housing, quality of life. It's led by a fellow named Paul Shattuck, who's really recognized as one of the national, international leaders in this area. And he has a growing team, and they're doing fabulous work. And I'm going to draw on a lot of their work here. If there are any mistakes or errors, they're my fault. If there are things you like, it's these guys. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk first about where the study of the issue of employment falls in the landscape of autism research. There's a lot of autism research going on. What are we doing in the area of studying employment? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about findings on some of the challenges that we face related to better employment outcomes for individuals on the spectrum, and some findings we have on the potential solutions. Then I'll try to talk about some priority research directions as I see them, and then some thoughts on how research and practice can work together to foster innovation here. So that's sort of the lay of the land. So first, what's going on with research on employment for individuals with autism relative to what's going on elsewhere in autism research? The story is pretty dismal. And this is what I've done here is I just did a quick search of published research studies on intervention in children with autism and published research studies on autism and employment. This is not a complete count. I only looked at one database. I looked at the PubMed database. There are other databases in rehabilitation data and PsychLit. And I scanned those, and the trends were basically very, very similar. So this is not an exhaustive count, but the pattern that you see here holds. We've seen a tremendous rise in publications focused on and research focused on interventions for young kids since beginning around the 1990s, and a much more anemic rise in research on employment in adults with autism. And there's this tenfold difference in publications, which I think, even though, again, this is an imperfect count, I think is probably pretty accurate about the extent of the body of research related to employment in autism and intervention earlier in the lifespan. If you talk about investment of dollars, there's something called the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. They actually met yesterday. Some in the room were at the meeting. Representatives from the federal government, all the different agencies, HHS, DOE, CDC, that fund autism research. And they set the agenda for autism research. And a few years ago, they were actually tallying all the dollars, federal and private, that went into autism research. They stopped in fiscal year 2010, so these data are a few years old. But in fiscal year 2010, 406 million federal and non-federal dollars are being spent on autism research. Searchable database. If you search for the word employment, 1.3% of that research expenditure was on employment. And if you weed out the studies that hit on employment just because it was maybe a study of an intervention on language in childhood, and in the abstract, the team said, well, this might have positive effects for employment outcomes down the line, so they're not really studying employment. It gets you down to 0.5%. That was in 2010. So since 2010, things have been happening. This is an RFA, a call for proposals. It's active right now, issued by the National Institutes of Health for service research on autism spectrum disorders across the lifespan. This is on adults. There's also a separate call for transition-age youth. This is a good thing. The total amount of money for those two RFAs is $1.3 million. You know, a drop in the bucket compared to what's probably now close to $600 million being invested in autism research. They did this last year as well. They had a special call on services related to autism, and there they had three focus areas: services for young kids, transition age, and adults. And they funded about $8 million there. It was a slightly bigger pool. And I could search that also for research that was related to employment, which obviously would focus on those latter two categories. And 3% of that was focused on employment. So this is an understudied area. Some of what's going on here is a no-duh, but there's a lot more that we need to learn about understanding what predicts good employment outcomes and what kind of programs work, and we're not investing enough in this. So if there's no other message for a group that comes from across different sectors who's engaged and committed to this issue, something that should be somewhere on your do list, maybe not at the top, but somewhere on your do list is helping to support more research in this area. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do know, some of the findings. So first I'm going to talk about findings about the challenges that we faced here, and then I'm going to separately talk a little bit about findings related to possible solutions. So we heard from Dr. Harker talked a little bit about some of the work that we've done in just describing some of the challenges here. And descriptive studies, sometimes they can be criticized. You know, you're just doing the obvious, you're navel gazing, you're admiring the problem. But they are important to do to build consensus for investment. And so, you know, while I think we have some good descriptive information, I think there's more that needs to be done there as well, as you'll see. Then by observational studies, I mean, okay, what can we learn about what predicts who has more challenges or less challenges just by observing people in nature, just by observing what's going on, not doing any experiments, not doing any formal program evaluations. And there's been some work in that area as well. So I'll talk a little bit about descriptive studies and those observational studies. I'll highlight a few things. So this first slide comes from, this is data from the National Longitudinal Transition Survey 2. And this is a federal survey that was done, contracted by the Department of Education. People have published on it. You can find it in the academic literature if you're so inclined to go there. But what our group has done, what Paul Shattuck's group has done, is we're producing a series of reports called National Autism Indicator Reports. And the first one is focused on transition into young adulthood. And I'll give you the link to this at the end on the last slide. So this is some information from this very nice resource that's summarized here. So this is designed to really translate what's known about this into very easy to understand terms and infographics. So what do we have here? So we've heard a little bit about this kind of data, and you can cut this different ways. But this is one graphic on just the outcome of proportion of individuals working at any time in this window, age 21 to 25. So the outcome here is you've had a job for any length of time, part-time, full-time, in this window. 99% of individuals in the United States in that age group would answer yes to that question. If you look at individuals with disability, you see that starting with learning disabilities, we have a number that's pretty close. And if we go down by different disabilities classifications, here we get to individuals with autism, the lowest of all the disability classifications that were looked at in this report. Striking in and of itself for sure. And if you dig a little bit deeper, as I've done over here, or as Paul did over here, you can learn a few more things, and you can get some sort of some provocative clues as to perhaps what might be predicting who's doing better, who's not doing better, and why here. If you look at the individuals, this is now with autism, who had a history of any work during high school compared to those who had no history of work during high school, you see a dramatic difference. Now, notice that 40% here so just to explain this, so those who did not work during high school, 40% were not working in this window post high school. If you did work in high school, 90%. I think I flipped this. So 40% were working, 90% were working here. So that's a little confusing in my clipping of graphics from here. I apologize. Right. So if you worked during high school, higher proportion have reported some work in this age range. If you haven't worked in high school, a much lower proportion. Right? Why is that? Is it because the work experience itself in high school is conferring skills that are transferable to work later? Or is it because the kinds of kids who are working in high school are more likely to work later? Pretty important question. We don't really have an answer to that yet. So there's an example right there about why we need to follow up on these kinds of findings. So what about studies that have looked at what does predict better outcomes? What predicts who works, who doesn't work? This is a systematic review that was done and published before the era of the National Longitudinal Transition Survey. So it was before the data that I showed in the previous slide were available. So there has been some improvement over this 18 studies or so, but we're not talking a doubling yet. So at this time, there were only 18 studies, and only 4 of those studies were rated as high quality. So in thinking about just observing the experiences of individuals and can we see who tends to do better, who doesn't do better, this research base is minuscule. The only conclusion that these reviewers drew for this that you could predict is, sort of a no doubt. That a predictor of consistent employment outcomes, and most of the employment outcomes studied in these studies were very simple. Do you have a job? Do you not have a job? Was IQ. And they couldn't, then that doesn't mean IQ is the most important predictor, the only predictor. It just means that this very flimsy body of research could only support that conclusion at this point in time. So clearly you need to do more on predictors. So once the National Longitudinal Transition Survey was available, there have been, again, a few more papers. 18 hasn't been doubled. 5 or 6 more papers that started looked at that data source, trying to understand predictors. And this is an analysis that Paul Shattuck, my colleague, published in Pediatrics a few years ago, where he looked at an assessment of skill. And this is a very different assessment of skill than what Torkel does in his program. This was based on questions about simple activities of daily living, being able to look up phone numbers, being able to manage money, count change, telling times. These are fairly basic activities of daily living. And stratifying individuals and whether or not they were in the lowest quartile, lowest 25% of skill, or highest quartile of skill based on this index, summing up the responses to questions about those very simple abilities. The population of individuals with autism in this 21 to 25 age range, the lowest quartile in skill and the highest quartile in skill. So again, the outcome here is, have you ever worked in the 21 to 25 age range? And not surprising, I keep getting this backwards here. No work or school, so I apologize. So here, the percentage is how many did not work or were not in school. So this is not a work-only outcome, this is disconnection. So 21 and 25, you are not working, you are not in school. So in the lowest school group, higher proportion of that bad outcome. In the highest skill quartile, a much lower proportion. But what we also see is they look at family income. Again, the highest and lowest quartile. Right? And as you would expect, the outcomes are better in the highest income group, worse in the lowest group. Right? More bad outcomes, not working, not in college, in the lower income group. So we see an interaction between skill level and income. And the difference here is interesting to observe. So here, the difference is many-fold, right? 4 or 5-fold. Here, the difference is about a doubling, but the absolute difference is much greater here. There's only a 10% difference here and that 30% difference here. So understanding the way factors that predict outcome, like skill level and income, and the way they interact is very important. And this is one of a handful of studies that has even started to try to scratch the surface. Okay, what about findings on solutions? So we have a couple of different studies that we can look at here too. We can look at observational studies, again, just observing information on people in the world, and we can do experiments where we actually randomize individuals into one service state and individuals into another service state. As you would guess, those kinds of randomized studies in this area are going to be exceedingly rare. They're one. In areas like clinical medicine, before an intervention program is rolled out to scale, there's always randomized trials. Now, I'm not saying that there always needs to be randomized trials if we're talking about interventions for employment, because that might be a bar that would stop us from innovating. But I think if we really want to develop the kind of evidence base that is going to convince policymakers and legislatures and philanthropists that they need to make huge, big, important bets on this, we're going to need to think about doing those kinds of studies at greater frequency. So let me just go through a few results and then move on pretty quickly. So the data source here for these studies and for other studies that are the majority of studies in this area is the U.S. Department of Education RS-911 database. Sounds like it should be the National Security Administration, not the DOE, right? This is the database of closed cases from vocational rehabilitation. So this is all individuals who received VR services. And data is collected at the time that they separate. So if you look at the proportion of individuals when they separate from VR, and this is national data, 30,000 individuals here, huge sample. You look at the proportion when they separated that were working with autism, it's about 36%, and it's lower for all other disabilities served by VR. Now, there's no comparison here to individuals who do not have VR services. This is only those who have VR. And that's very important, and we need, and that would be high on my list of the next study that another study that we should invest in doing. This is a study that, again, same data source, and this looks only at individuals who have autism in VR, and they're trying to see what supports that VR provides had more of an impact on getting them jobs when they separated VR. And there are some interesting findings here. Certain things seem to have worked. This is an odds ratio. This is about 3. This means that if you received counseling, you were about 3 times more likely to have a job when you separated than if you did. But if you were in college while you were on VR, it didn't make a difference. If you had vocational training while you were on VR, it didn't make a difference. Interesting, important study, but there was no ability here to adjust, to come up with which one of these things was the active ingredient. You couldn't see whether or not the job placement effect was independent of the counseling. And there was very limited ability to what we call adjust for confounders, to see whether or not some of these associations were caused by other things that were unmeasured that might be more prevalent in the group of individuals who received counseling than the group of individuals who didn't. But this kind of work needs to be done with more studies, more rigorous design. The trial, the one randomized trial, some in the room may know about this. It was done in Virginia by Paul Wayman, who's a name that's known to folks who study employment and autism. This was a study of Project Search. How many have heard of Project Search? Many of you have heard of Project Search. It's an internship-based program, fairly intensive. High school age kids are moved out of the high school classroom into this internship setting. They get some schooling at the workplace. What Wayman's group did is they modified Project Search specifically for individuals with autism, added some autism-specific services to this. 40 participants, very small trial, but randomly assigned to Project Search or a control group. Looked at the differences in those who were assigned randomly, so there shouldn't be systematic differences, but it's a small sample, so there are going to be differences by chance. And by chance, the Project Search group tended to report more behavioral problems, but there were less in this group who had an autistic disorder diagnosis than in this group. So there were some differences, and that's what you get when you have a very small trial, which is why we need trials done at a size. But the results are fairly striking. 1 year after starting the program, 87% of the students who were in Project Search had employment. This is outside of Project Search now, compared to 6% who didn't. So the problems, very small, could be a chance finding. This control group, they had no contact with the control group. The kids in the control group were just getting whatever they were getting in high school in their IEP. So some of this effect might just be sort of a contact effect. So again, one study, it's pitiful. You know, we need to have a much richer evidence base. All right, so priority research directions. I've hinted at some of these things. So when we're talking about understanding the challenges, there's a lot we have to do. One of the things we need to do is we need to expand the outcomes that we study. Work participation is great, but what about job retention, satisfaction, and impact? Torkel talked about the cost study in Australia. We certainly need to be thinking about cost when we think about impact, and we need to think about quality of life, measuring that for families and for the individuals with autism. We also really need to think about predictors that are going to inform programming. I may be interested in whether or not kids who have a history of seizures are going to do better in an employment program, one versus another, but probably not going to help us build the best programs. So we need to think about what we might want to measure, things like executive function, the presence of things like anxiety and depression, level of social cognition. Are these the kinds of things that predict who's going to do better in one program versus another? Because if we learn that, then we can tweak our programs to emphasize these things as opposed to taking sort of a shotgun approach. We have to measure what matters. So I talked a little bit about a couple of measurement issues, but this is Paul Shattuck's phrase, and I put it here because the researchers shouldn't be the sole people deciding what matters. We have some ideas of things that we think are interesting, right, and they're probably good bets, but we need to get the employers to the table, we need to get the individuals with autism to the table, we need to get the families to the table, and we got to make sure we measure the right things as we move research forward in this area. And we have to do longitudinal studies, which are hard to do. Can't do cross-sectional. We have to see how people do over time, which is expensive. What else? What about solutions? Well, we have to have comparison groups, right? When I showed you the study with no comparison group, people picked up on that right away. And the quality of research in general in that we have so far is pretty poor. We need to step up the game a little bit here, and that's just one example. Another is ways to combat confounding. We have to have big enough samples and employ methods that are commonly used in other fields to try to protect against the biases that can be introduced in this kind of research. Have to understand the active ingredients, right? Is it the counseling, or is it the job coaching, or is it really both? You have to be able to do that. More randomized studies. Hard to do. You don't need to do a randomized study before you try something or move. But again, if we're going to make the big bets, if we're going to convince people of things, we're going to have those, in my view. And finally, we have to study innovation. We can't just study, VR is great services, you know, and it's important to study what's going on in VR, but we have to study programs like what Thorkel is doing and other innovative programs around the country, and there are many that people are doing. We have to find a way to embed and bake research into those initiatives, and that's hard for a few reasons. So how can we do that? How can research and practice work together? So the innovators in this area, folks like Thorkel, need to commit to try to collecting data and evaluate. And this is hard to do. They're moving fast. They have goals. But if we're gonna scaffold this, if we're gonna build, we have to have the evidence base to support this. This is gonna involve a culture of compromise for practitioners and researchers. I would want Thorkel to give 17 surveys. You can't do that. But we have to find a way to come together, and this is very hard. People are well-intentioned, but you have to make the deals and you have to work this out. It's really important. At the margin, it's going to take a little bit more resources, right? I mean, Thorkel and other programs like it, they're out there, they're doing. If we're gonna append some research on this, someone's going to have to pay for that. It has to come somewhere. Competitive funding from the federal government, they've got those RFAs like I showed. You know, it could be that Thorkel with a partner could maybe compete for something like that. But you know, what I say, $1.3 million across the whole country, the resources are small. So there's going to have to be investment by the sponsors, the companies, the governments who are working with programs like Thorkel. They're going to have to say that we're willing to pay a little bit more to measure what matters here so that we can prove this and really foster dissemination. I think we can convince folks to do that, because even if you have a bottom line orientation, and I know it's really important to have that, companies know better than anybody else. If you've got a product, you want to continue to research it and invest in that research to improve it, to survive. And it's the same thing we're talking about here. So lastly, researchers should find ways to incubate innovative programming themselves. So what we need to do is not just say to folks like Oracle who are out there fighting the good fight in the trenches, why not, come on, let's pay attention. We want to study. We need to try to find ways to build and incubate programs ourselves that we can study. And at Drexel, we've been successful. This is brand new news, just came through last week. Drexel University will be rolling out something called the Transition Pathways Initiative. So this is funded primarily at this point from a very generous anonymous gift. But the university means universe. So the idea is that universities can be a place where new programs around employment for individuals with autism and other challenges can be incubated. So what Drexel is going to do is we're going to launch a program focused on 12 to 16-year-old kids who are, at this point, are not intending to go to college. And they're going to have, excuse me, I think I got the age range wrong. It's 12 to 16 adults. The age range is, I believe, 18 to, so new I can't even remember, 18 to 24. So these are individuals who are not intending at this point to go to college. They're going to come to campus and they're going to have two paths. They're going to have a work path or a college path. At the work path, it's going to be very similar to something like Project Search. There's going to be internship programs, supervised employment, and supports for a 2-year period. For college, they're going to get to audit classes, interact on the campus environment. For the work path, where are we going to find the employers? Well, we're a university. We've got physics labs and food service and public safety. We're going to employ the individuals. We're going to try, and we're going to bake in the research. We're going to collect the data. We're going to commit to doing that. And we're going to make this an integrated model for research and innovative practice here. Our goal is to expand this over 9 years at Drexel, and then hopefully integrate it into Drexel. Hopefully it'll stay beyond that. We're also going to work on trying to sort of, while we study this, trying to manualize this and promote it to other universities. So this is a way that I think is really important for researchers, not just to say, the innovators got to slow down and let us study you. We have to sort of reverse that, do some innovation ourselves, and study it. And we're trying to do that up north in Philadelphia. So that's all I have to say. Here's the website for the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute, our general email. We do pay attention to that, so you can contact us that way. And this is a direct link with one of these crazy URLs to that autism indicators report. And I'm going to make these available, so there'll be a PDF somewhere online, so you can find that. If you're writing furiously, you'll be able to find it. All right, so that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
My slides, sure. Excuse me. You're so organized. Okay, this advances. And that goes right here. Oh, okay. So anyway, I want to thank all of my colleagues in all these previous discussions, kind of setting up context and studies and social entrepreneurial efforts like Torkel and commitments by local businesses. One of the things I wanted to really drill down to in my discussion today was really about families and what families have to go through to kind of negotiate a system that is going to get their child living independently and working independently in the community, and all the things that bear down on them that even the best educated, highest paid professional really doesn't understand what they're up against. So I'm going to kind of take you through kind of a logical sequence of what that looks like. And again, I really want to drill this down to families, to individuals. Based on my experience of working at Columbus, we're a service provider. I also just gave you some acronyms because we all get caught up in our acronyms, and you can refer back to those. And I'll try to be clear about what they are. But just to give you a little bit of background about Columbus, we're a service provider, so we're on the front lines of working with families and individuals with disabilities to get them out living in the community. We provide residential services, we provide employment services, we offer respite care for families. We're really full service. We've been around 50 years, so our origins go back to the early 50s when we were a businessman found some families that started a daycare program that eventually morphed into one of the largest service providers in Utah, based in Salt Lake County. I will, however, contextualize that with Elwyn, which has serves 15,000 people, and they're 150 years old or something like that. 163, around a lot longer than we were. But in the West, 50 to 60 years is quite a long time frame. We consider ourselves, our business model is a social enterprise. So we balance business services with social services. And we're one of 1,500 what they call community rehabilitation programs in the US. And so our primary mission is to work with businesses, work with business opportunities to create employment. So we actually employ people, we train people, we place them in the community. We have pretty much full service from beginning to end, starting with kids who are about 16 to all the way to retirement age. I'm going to point out our revenue source because this is what makes us a strong nonprofit, and a nonprofit that's really able to be at the front lines and represent families and their children with disabilities. So, and I'm going to go over some of the funding sources that impact all of these discussions that we're having today, so you can see just the complexity of what families and service providers like us and academics and social entrepreneurs like Torkel have to deal with. So our revenue stream, 60% comes from federal sources. It comes down through public education. It comes down through the Center of Medicaid Services. It gives us some real stability and lifetime services for individuals with disabilities. I'm going to talk in general about intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD, but within that larger framework would be autism. So I'm not going to drill down too much to autism. And so we generate about 35% of our income from our business contracts. This ensures that we're getting people out in paid employment in the community, and not a lot on donations, but when donors do step up to the table for efforts like our expansion of employment, ASD services in Utah, they're very, very generous. And just, again, for some context and to understand the complexity of the system, we're regulated by 33 different regulatory bodies, all the way from DOL and CMS down to the local health department. And CARF is the international accreditation standard. We have to meet about 900 standards within CARF every 3 years to ensure that we're providing the best quality services and we're ensuring the health and safety of every individual that we serve. What I really find fascinating, I always have to go back into history and really kind of ground myself in that. And one reason we're all here today having this discussion really goes back to 1975 when children were mainstreamed into public schools through the federal law, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, Federal Law 94-142. Any of you who are educators know this by heart. And it was really the time and the place where kids really started to enter the public education system and have the same kind of equality that their non-disabled peers had. I'm very proud of Utah. We were one of the first states that did that at the state level. We're recognized as a very conservative state, but when you're not looking, we can be very progressive. And we were actually had special education classes, and some very subversive mothers tracked down some legislators and convinced them, pretty much twisted arms until they were willing to fund some of those services in the public schools. That did become a model with a couple of other states for the 1975 law. The 1990 ADA Act gave us really the civil rights platform, some of the legal platforms for making sure that children with disabilities and adults with disabilities were receiving protection. Again, Utah had some influence in that, backed by Senator Orrin Hatch. And then the public education law got updated in 2004, so now it's called IDEA. And if you've been in the public education system, you're probably familiar with that, and IEPs and things like that that get kids through the schools. In spite of the fact that we have children in public schools who are getting equal access to education, once they hit the age of 22, they can go to school until they're 22 if they have a disability. They fall there are families. I have not talked to a family in Salt Lake City that doesn't give me the deer in the headlight look and say, we just got out of public school and we're standing at the cliff and we don't know where to go. There's lots of services available. There's Elwyn's, there's academic institutions, there's organizations like Torkels, there's smaller nonprofits like us. We're kind of the front line of that. But there are very, very few parents who hit that age with their child at 22 where they really know how to take the next step. And the statistics show me that even after going into our fourth generation of children coming out of public schools with an education, we're still facing incredible statistics that don't change. The needle doesn't move. We have 1 in 5 individuals with disabilities in the general population, so that's 0 to end of life. 3% of our population has an intellectual or developmental disability. 1 in 10 families is impacted, and 1 in 11 adults between ages 16 and 64 just aren't in the workforce. You can tease those numbers out through research, as Craig did, in kind of lots of different ways. But when you look at the high-level U.S. Census data and some of that associated data, those numbers just haven't changed in the last 50 years. That's something that keeps me awake at night, that makes me realize how important it is for organizations like Elwyn and Columbus to be out there is, again, this is data that just doesn't change. 68% of adults without disabilities are participating in the labor force. You know, that's been up and down in the last 8 years with an economy that's really been challenging all of us, but the participation rate of adults with disabilities is 19%. The unemployment rate now, thankfully, is down to 4.5. It's almost down to 0 in Utah right now because we have a very, very robust economy. But adults with disabilities in general, 12%. So you can see there's a significant difference. If you start looking at the numbers that aren't being counted, there's about 10 million people out there who just aren't being counted in this data. A lot of them have disabilities. They just don't know how to access the system to even be considered looking for work. So after 3 generations of Public Law 94-142 and ADA, the true employment rate, depending on the kind of disability you have, can range anywhere from 65 to 90%. That just needle never moves. The 90% is closer to individuals like we serve that are very severely disabled. So, and then you can just see this picture of what it looks like. The gray, I know I have a pointer here. This gray area would be people in the workforce. The yellow band, people who are unemployed and looking. But the people who aren't in the labor force, who really aren't counting, are in that blue section. And this is this reflects Utah, so about 120,000, almost 140,000 people with disabilities, and that's what the picture of employment looks like. What I wanted to drill down to is the families and the young adults who are coming out of public education who really want to follow their peers into work and life and everything that they were encountering in public schools. These are 3 great success stories, and they really show a range of disabilities, the range of services that we offer, and they're the ones who defied the odds. So Sarah over here on the far side is 24 years old. She has a pretty severe intellectual disability. She has a very loving, caring family. Her father's a CFO of Workmen's Compensation Fund. He's really connected in the community. He's accessed every possible service for his daughter and has made a lifetime plan for her. And he just joined my board at Columbus, and he still has the deer in the headlight looks. And he tries not to. He's made all the right steps, but his biggest worry for his family was getting Sarah out working and being with her peers and having a full life. Jamie came to us with a hearing impairment and some mental health issues from a family where she was living in homelessness for a short time. Her mother finally in some supported public housing. She came to us through vocational rehabilitation. She figured out the system. We found out she loved to read. We got her a job at the library at our community college, and she decided school was an option for her. So she's pretty well on her way with an occasional touch point with us. And then the other Jamie, the young woman here, brain damage from a tumor when she was a child. When I first met her, when she was 14 years, talking about when she was 14, she never really thought that she would finish school, get married, have a family, have a job. And through an internship program with Zions Bank, a large regional bank in Salt Lake, she is well on to her career path and recently happily married and just returned from Italy on her honeymoon. So some great success stories. As I was talking to my colleagues at Columbus, we were just trying to figure out where is it that things get out of whack when you turn 22, what really happens. And so we kind of did a comparison of what a family with a disability looks like versus a family without a disability. And this is kind of the life cycle that we all experience. I'm kind of finished going through this life cycle. My kids are in their 20s. And you're a family, you have a child, the child doesn't have a disability, you rely on public education, private, if that's a choice for you. You hope that your child gets a job. With all that comes employment and benefits and taxes and more education through work and additional resources, acquisition of family wealth, paying taxes, getting tax-supported services, and you hope that your child repeats that process. But when we were really doing a comparison of this, and we were looking at the life cycle of a family with a disability, for example, Sarah, things are pretty much the same, pretty normal. I'll use air quotes on that. The family has a child, the child has a disability, the child gets pulled into the safety net of the public education system till 22. Services are pretty comprehensive. 22, the child gets out of school, and that's where the parents are standing at the cliff with their child going, what do we do next? And really the only options for them, besides supported employment and some interventions on the part of organizations like ours, is turning to government entitlements and social services. And so all of a sudden this family is living in the world of entitlements and social services. And it's just a complete opposite of what a family without a disability is going to be going through. And then as the life cycle kind of comes to a close, you really have a redistribution of family resources that are going to caregiving and planning for the end of life of parents and hoping that their child will be taken care of by siblings or whatever's out there. And so that's really what life looks like for a family living who are facing the cliff. I just wanted to quickly, I won't go through all of these, but when you are an adult with a child with a disability, you have incredible protections from the federal level that work their way down. You have regulations that protect people. You have funding that gets people into services, but it's also incredibly befuddling. I mean, this took me about a week to sort through all this. These are all the federal agencies that touch Columbus, touch an individual, protect an individual with disabilities. These are the entitlements that people get associated with that. And these are all the things that families have to start working their way through to see if they can pull the safety net together for their children. So basically, the building blocks for families with children with disabilities start with special education, or some sort of public education. Vocational rehab becomes the kind of transition age to get kids out into employment, but it's limited in time. Families need to turn to the Social Security Administration looking for Social Security disability insurance or social supplemental income. And then they need to kind of cobble together support services through Health and Human Services. And that's funding, again, that comes down through Medicaid, through IDD programs and Medicaid and insurance like that. So that's what families have up here, and they really have very little understanding of that. So it really, this is really the life cycle of federal support down to what families are receiving. And you can see that there's a lot of layers. It's the public school system that really is the turning point for a lot of families, and it's the safety net. But it comes down through multiple layers, multiple issues of compliance and regulation and safety. And by the time it hits the families, you've got the deer in the headlight look. I did want to make a nod to economic and fiscal policy because I'm a new board member to the Global Interdependence Center, and I was reading a colleague's work, John Sylvia, talking about moving forward on our economic policy that affects all these other things. And one of the assumptions he recognized is that as we're looking at this big economic picture and entitlement picture, that a lot of policy that we deal with just doesn't deal with the uncertainty that families go through when a disability is involved, or that companies are going through. And we're talking about a lot about how you get people into work into companies, and there's lots and lots of uncertainty around that that's really not taken into the larger policy picture. And his recommendation going forward is we really needed to look at labor, capital, technology, and innovation as ways to guide policy. And all these options that we're talking about today really play on those four things. So here's the cliff. 0 to 5, you're socializing your child, you're getting medical care, there's childhood development. You get into the grade school and secondary school, again, socialization with family and peers, and kind of all the things that you expect to get until they hit 18 to 22 and they quit talking to you. And they tell you how stupid you are. And then they turn 25 or 26 and they realize that you were not that stupid. I hope. The cliff, this to me is like the key diagram that shows what families go through trying to put together all these resources to take someone like Sarah to get her through to the end of her lifetime. And I think it was already mentioned, I think Craig, you might have mentioned this, but diagnosis is where you start here. It's not childhood development, it's not having the baby, it's not medical care, but it's a diagnosis of a disability, and that drives everything. And you can see this list is much more complex. You've got to deal with medical interventions, behavior, you're bringing experts in, you have to rely on your family, case management becomes a part of your life, caregiving, insurance. When you get into the high school years, you're dealing with all the requirements of public school, medical care. You might not have insurance that covers things associated with autism, for example. You're looking at support services and VR from IDD funding and VR funding that's coming down through the state and ultimately the feds. Are you going to put your child on Social Security disability income? Are you going to qualify for SSI? Guardianship, special needs trust, family finances, sibling relationships, caregiving costs, case management, FMLA. That's what families are dealing with. They hit 23, they hit the top of the cliff, and all those things really start to go away if parents haven't put that in place. And it takes a lot of work when you're coming in the door with a 22-year-old to someplace like Columbus to try to backtrack on all that. So it's not fun. It's just not fun. These are all young women whose families really, either on their own or with the help of their families, have a successful career track. Sarah will always have support services and through entitlement programs and great family support, and at some point her siblings will take care of her. Jamie here is going to go on and be just fine. She's a smart young woman. She's pursuing an education. She wants to work. She really knows how she can take advantages of opportunities available to her. And then Jamie, the other Jamie, is just a great example of pretty much a normalized life after some severe traumatic brain injuries. So anyway, as I was looking at the family with a disability, family without a disability, I really wanted to overlap those circles and see if there was any way where we could find innovation in that space. And I think Torkel's program and my great fortune of meeting Torkel and seeing that there's social entrepreneurs out there who are really looking for innovation, businesses like CAI that are looking for innovation. We really need to keep pursuing that innovation space, but we always have to remember that we're going to have this government entitlement and social services piece compared to the employment piece, and the more we can start to overlap those and kind of bring some normalcy to that family cycle, I think the better off we are in the long run. Utah, I'm going to just brag a little bit about Utah. We have a 0% unemployment rate. All the business publications are telling us what a great spot Utah is in terms of the economy. A lot of these issues I've brought up today, funding sources, regulations, are really influenced by what the economy's doing. We have the second highest rate of autism in the country. You can't throw a rock in anywhere without hitting a family that has someone with autism or with some intellectual disability. We're a small state, much like Delaware. We have government leaders who really are hands-on about these issues. We have state funding agencies that are actually talking to each other, and they're not operating in silos. They really want to maximize the dollars and maximize impact. Utah's become one of the few states in the country that's really embracing social impact investing and social impact bonds, which are a new form of funding that private investors are coming in, and they're trying to facilitate social change through capital investments. So we see things like a reduction in that unemployment rate, where we really are moving the needle. We have activist parents. My 93-year-old founding mother is still as active today as she was 60 years ago, and a lot of parents of the post-ADA generation who are involved. We're conservative. Most of you probably know that about Utah. They throw us in the red state category, but you'd be surprised how progressive and entrepreneurial we really are. We have great university resources. We have everything kind of co-located in Salt Lake County along the Wasatch Front. And because of the influence of the LDS Church there, we have a very strong ethic of service and humanitarian services that we can really tap into and operationalize. So I think Utah is really, we're going to be we've entered a licensing partnership with Torkel. I think he's going to bring us some of the pieces that are already done to facilitate growing our autism services in Utah. And hopefully Ernie's going to make a few visits during ski season. But in the end, really the way I see the picture playing out is that the focus is on the family. The focus is on that child who's turning 22. It's on the parents who are really, standing at the edge of that cliff. And it's all of us coming together in this room and really talking to each other and interacting and trying to kind of break out of these silos and work regulations in our favor, work entrepreneurial answers to this, work donors, get everybody talking to really make a difference. And I want to end with an anecdote to how important this is for me on a daily basis. One of the things I love about Columbus is I get to give tours every day of what we do. And a couple of weeks ago, the Utah Transit Authority law enforcement team came in to see what we do, because they interact with a lot of people on public transportation with disabilities. And 4 of the fathers there were 12 men with guns and badges. They were big guys, they were a little intimidating. And 4 fathers said to me that they had children with intellectual disabilities, 3 of them with kids with ASD. And their 8 peers who were standing around them were clearly empathetic. They were there as a support system. And it really struck me to see a man with a gun who gets to enforce the law kind of near tears, because he really didn't know what the next step was going to be for his child with ASD. So in conclusion, I probably talked too long already, but in conclusion, I think that in all these discussions that we have, we really need to understand the complexities that families have to face. We really need to start with the family, and then we need to try to make as straightforward and positive and progressive our efforts together, so that the next generation, 3 or 4 generations after we're all gone from here, that we have children who are really fully integrated, and we've really moved the needle on some of those unemployment rates and integration in the community. So thank you.
One of the fun things about being the last speaker is the question, hasn't everything been said? And am I going to stick around and is it going to be boring or whatever? Well, I'm going to try to take you in a little different direction than everyone else. I've spent 46 years in the field, 40 years of it as an executive director of agencies serving people with disabilities. And my last 6 years of full-time employment retirement, I'm going to be 70 next week, has been spent in direct care, which has been very enlightening, going from administration down to direct care. So I'm going to be speaking to you more as a provider and somebody who's working with those individuals we've been speaking about who want to get a job and why I think I'm having trouble helping them do that. Well, am I pressing wrong? As we said a while ago, Elwyn has a long-standing agency. We're probably the oldest agency in the country serving people with disabilities. We've been around for 163 years. We serve all kinds of different levels of individuals. But even when we started our programs 163 years ago here in Philadelphia, we were concentrating on getting people to work, making shoes, working on farms. Work has always been part of a person's self-identity and self-worth. But what we're looking at as business people is we want a skilled workforce. We want, specialized skill sets from people. That's what we all want when we hire people. The problem is that there are obstacles that are preventing us from, doing this. And we need some innovation to bring some of these qualified people that we've been talking about all day into the workforce. And we need to do some accommodations so that we'll have greater productivity and a better bottom line, because that's what it's all about. People are in business to make money, not to be a charity. When I go out, I don't want to speak to people from a point of view of being a charity. I want to fulfill a need that they have for employment and assure them that the people that I'm bringing to them can fulfill that job responsibility. So again, you all know the statistics. You've all heard today about the various work skills. You know about how good the people are. But the cost to society for the underemployed and the unemployed is just so amazing. First of all, to underutilize people with talent is a crime in itself, and that's one of the worst social dilemmas that we're facing. Underutilizing people who can contribute to our society and to our way of life. But also how costly it is to us as businesses, as taxpayers, to support programs like SSI, SSDI, Section 8 housing, welfare. It's costly also for us to run programs for people who aren't employed, running sheltered employment and sheltered and supported employment and training programs. It costs right now about $262 billion a year to support autism services. And a majority of the costs in the United States are in adult services, $196 billion. It's unsustainable. As the number of children that we've identified as having autism grow into adulthood, and they live their adulthood until 60, 70, 80 years old, if we do not bring about employment, it's unsustainable as a society to keep funding at these kinds of levels, and people don't want to work. Why? Because if I am right now receiving SSI or SSDI, and I also receive Section 8 housing, and I also get work, some food stamps, and I also get people helping me out at home and helping me cook, why should I go to work? You're paying me as a society not to work, because if I want to go to work, you're underemploying me, or you're putting me at an entry-level job that I can't make as much money as if I don't work. So why should I work? Every day I'm confronted. I work with the Ticket to Work program. That's a branch of the Social Security, and I want to bring people to work. And I ask, why aren't you want the job? Because it's not going to pay enough. And I'm talking about skilled people who know that they can stay in their little cocoon at home, be isolated and do their thing, which they love as people with autism, rather than face that world of work and still get all of this money if I'm going to be underemployed. I can't say you're going to make more money working than sitting at home because it's not true. And so some of these things we have to look at and we have to change. Only 15% of people in autism are full-time employment. So why should I work? 9% are in part-time employment. Again, I can't earn enough to get off the benefits and that comfort zone and all of that safety net that we've created for people. 31% of people across all disabilities. More than a quarter of graduates with autism are unemployed. Only 10% of people with autism receive support in finding work. And 37% of adults with autism have never had a paid job after age. And again, a lot of that is because it's easier for them to stay at home than it is to go out and try to find a job or to get a job. So what are the obstacles? Obviously, the misconceptions regarding autism, company diversity, recruiting individuals do not always include individuals with disabilities. Challenges of many individuals with ASD to self-advocate for themselves, and many individuals with ASD struggle with social interactions which impact their interview process. The whole process of recruiting needs to be looked at. Well, if all they have to do today, even with our own agency at Elwyn, if you want a job, you go on the internet and you fill out the application. That doesn't work with people with autism. So they fill out the application. They'll probably never get to the interview. And if they do get to the interview stage, we have to look at that whole thing. Why should someone who is seemingly intelligent, experienced, occupationally qualified, even need support or additional help to work? Because without it, they'll never get the job. They have compatible skills with competence in their work colleagues. However, they struggle when they are expected to learn tasks, transfer skills from one situation to another, and multitask in the same way as someone with Asperger's syndrome, and therein lies the root of the difficulties. In Elwyn, for example, it was very interesting. We hire probably over 3,000 people in our various locations in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, California, Florida, or whatever. I started a program with our own agency of hiring people with disabilities using some of the things I'm talking about. And I've had success in having almost 100 people hired in the last 6 to 8 months within our own agency of serving people with disabilities. Because our own hiring practices, our own HR departments didn't know and was not set up in a way that allowed individuals with autism to be hired. We use a method of assessing individuals. We use customized employment model. We need creative accommodations. We need to pair with local agencies serving those with disabilities for training and support. We need alternative assessments and training models, and we need innovative recruiting strategies. We use customized employment. I'm sure most of you have heard of this, if not, mostly brought about by Mark Gold and Associates and so forth, where in fact, we go out and we try to look at that individual and see what are their real skills, talents, interests, abilities, what are the things that are preventing them from being employed and getting employed, and we spend as much time as necessary with that person at home, in their community, not just on the work site, but getting to know the individual, know why they feel so comfortable in their comfort zone, and how is that going to translate into a work environment. And then we use customized employment after the discovery of all of that to try to work with an employer to meet the need that they have and to make a match. You have a need, I have somebody who has the capability of meeting that need. And we know that because we've spent the time, and it's a good model. Some of the jobs, are jobs that exist. Sometimes we ask employers to look around and see if they can, what we call multiple source jobs, take jobs based on tasks delivered from a variety of jobs and create a whole new job that will really help them. In other words, we negotiate with the employer so that we can see how we can employ and take advantage of this person's skills, maybe taking some of the work away from someone else in the office so they can be more productive, doing something else. Create jobs. Contract businesses, carve, negotiate, or create job descriptions, perform under the contract, and sometimes even talk the employer into creating a micro enterprise, small business based on an unmet need in this local community. We help our individuals create their own businesses and provide the supports that they need to do that. Creative accommodations. We need to provide opportunities for isolation, time out to get away. We need to control the physical environment, things like, segregation, lighting, sound, all the things that we've heard already today. How many of us have considered establishing enclaves within our businesses? We have several enclaves. We have a pharmaceutical company that we are working with, that we have about 35 people working in an enclave within the overall manufacturing of a pharmaceutical company, and it's working out fine. It's a great stepping stone for people to get working and to be able to control the environment so that people can have the opportunity to work. And also the opportunity to work at home. A lot of companies are doing that with regular employees. Have we looked at the fact that some people with autism could be incredibly successful working from at home in an environment where they're good? We need to pair with community agencies if you want to be successful. Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, advocacy agencies, agencies serving with disabilities, resources from Autism Speaks. What's interesting is that if you go on the internet, under the Autism Speaks, they have all kinds of materials that I would advise you to make available to your HR people, to your managers, your trainers, and so forth, who want to do this. And, it can be extremely beneficial in terms of helping them. I also want to take a minute and talk about alternative training models. An old man, when I was younger, we used to use a lot of internship and apprenticeships as a means of educating and preparing people for employment. And people would stay in their jobs probably for their whole career. Volunteering is a problem. We need to have people spend time in an environment for two reasons. One, so that the employer can evaluate the individual and get accustomed to the individual. And of course, so the individual can get accustomed to the environment and that we can truly see a person. Unlike other individuals that I place who may have another developmental disability, where I can take them on the job and have a job coach and we spend a couple of weeks or a month and then we go ahead and let them be on the job and just support them. Many people with autism need more time. And the ability to volunteer and spend time enables them to get to feel more comfortable, to get adjusted or whatever. Why isn't that happening? People are afraid, companies are afraid. Am I going to have to pay them? Am I going to be in trouble with the labor department? Am I going to be, doing something that I shouldn't be doing by letting them volunteer? All of the liabilities. We have to look at solutions to those because they can be. Internship. We heard somebody speak about that just a moment ago. Like, Project Search is so successful, and yet we haven't taken that to the adult world where we can have temporary, either unpaid or and sometimes paid positions with an emphasis on the job training rather than merely employment, where people can go inside of a company and spend time and try them out at different jobs and do internships at various stations and see what they can do. And then again, apprenticeship, learning a job or skill by working for a fixed period of time for an employer with pay. It's something that we have lost in terms of companies saying that we will have a certain number of apprenticeships. Internship and apprenticeship may be an alternative for many of our people to even college or some very technical or vocational trade school. And we should consider whether or not we are in a position to provide for these alternative training models. As I said, we said 87.5% of the people working in search, somebody just said a while ago, get employed. Finally, the recruitment strategies, including people with disabilities and diversity recruitment goals, creating partnerships with disability-related advocacy organizations, contacting career centers at colleges and universities when vacancies arise, posting job announcements in disability-related publications, websites, and job fairs, establishing summer jobs, summer internships, and mentoring programs targeted towards transitioning youth who are in their 20s getting ready to, as someone just spoke about, go off the cliff from entitlement programs of school to all of a sudden they are adults and no longer there are entitlement programs that are going to support them. So I'm basically saying that as a person who's trying to get people employed, and especially high-functioning people with autism, and even those who don't have Asperger's, as we used to call it, but people who are maybe on the middle of that spectrum, who are very intellectually capable, but become underemployed, and therefore would prefer to stay home rather than work. Those are some of the target groups that I'm having the most trouble with, that I think that we can have an impact if we're willing to tackle those obstacles and make changes in terms of, well, we're talking about, policies that are government controlled or policies that are within the government or of our governance of our own, company. There are things that we can do to change the atmosphere. And the biggest one is the whole hiring structure. I need to get these people in front of someone and provide the right opportunity, sometimes even meet with the person that's going to do the interview before they interview, to train and prepare them for what they are going to face. Because again, some of our people, they're not going to interview well. That has nothing to do with their capabilities or skills. That's why volunteering and some of the other things often is a better way of getting people into a company, and then if they volunteer for a while, maybe somebody will say, well, why don't we just hire this person? Because they get to know them. But if nothing else, if we can just get in front of the HR people and bring in our people and have the opportunity to discuss with them what we know about them and support our individuals through the hiring process, so many more people could get employed. But we can never seem to break that barrier. You have to go through the computer, and that's the way we hire people. You can't go and walk into a company and say, can I talk to somebody in HR? When's the last time anybody could do that? Unless I walk into a store and the owner is there of that store, I have absolutely no luck getting into any middle-sized or large company. I can't get through the door. Nobody wants to talk to me because they'll say, go on a computer and put in an application. And as somebody had put up on one of the slides, what am I going to put? I love that on your slide. The application. What am I going to put on there? What is that person with autism going to put on there that's going to be able to define who they are enough that this person understands this is going to be a unique situation, but in the long run, it's not charity. I am going to benefit as a business. I am going to make more money. I am going to have a better workforce. And ultimately, by taking people off the unemployment roll and getting people not to be underemployed, we're going to reduce some of this tax burden that we're creating for ourselves as companies, as individuals, because we are supporting people not to work. And one of the reasons the numbers are so high for unemployment or underemployment for people who have autism is because of what I spoke about in terms of the fact that they got too much of a safety net. They get paid too much to stay at home to take an entry-level job. They're too intelligent for that. So basically, you know who's leading the way. We talked about the Walgreens. We talked about these companies. What's the next step that I'm asking everybody to do? Look at your workplace and see what you can do to make the environment autism-friendly. Look at your policies on recruitment, interviewing, internships, mentorships, summer jobs, whatever, and make a follow-up appointment Make some appointments with some agencies like ours who are willing to come in and train your employees, train your trainers, train your HR departments on how they can do a better job of hiring qualified workers. That's it for me. Questions?
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a few questions, if anyone has any. Yeah, or Mr. Microphone. Yeah. Oh, here's a question over here.
What would you say? Would you have any advice on disclosing autism in the workplace?
Stephanie or Tarkle? That sounds like yours.
Well, it's a very good question. And we had, over the last 12 years, I met many who said, I want my employer to know, but I don't dare to say it. And I have met autistic people who said, well, I told my employer and now I don't have a job anymore. So I understand the risk, and it's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer, really, for me. I think there's a long haul of changing the mindset in the companies, and I cannot give you a good answer to that, but I can say that we're working on it, and my aim is that it'll be seen as a part of neurodiversity rather than disability. If you're autistic, if you have ADHD or something else, if you are a non-mainstream person, I would like to get to the stage where employers would say, that's interesting. We need to have people of all different shapes if we want to understand our market, if we want to be good at innovation. We need people who think differently. But I do understand the question, and I don't have a good answer yet, but it's a very important subject that you're bringing.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit, that as you're working through systems like, sorry, to the podium? Oh.
Change it.
Okay. Yeah, let's have all the speakers come back up so we can address questions individually. Yeah, the disclosure issue is really, really difficult. If you're coming into the system through help, like vocational rehabilitation or other IDD funding sources, that's going to be disclosed, and there is an anticipation. And I think it's also a discussion that we need to be much more proactive about with the hiring managers and HR departments, because they have, when I showed you all those federal regulations, there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way of disclosure and what that looks like and what risk that means for you. And there's no easy way to do that. So I think it's really an ongoing conversation and bringing in some new stakeholders into the discussion as well.
In the back.
Question. I don't know a lot about this, but I was told that with certain agencies or companies that deal with the federal government, there's an obligation to hire people with disabilities. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. Once you disclose that, it sort of puts the employer on the defensive in a way. So this is, I think one of the insights here was the fact that these applications are considered a unique situation. And in the digital world, there's not much ability to accommodate unique situations. So that's why education of employers is so important. And hopefully this will be less unique based on the programs that we've been discussing. So, but is that so that there is an obligation under federal law?
Yeah, there is, and I think what happens, a lot of people will, disabilities is a broad term. And we're trying to reduce it to a certain level of people who are the most unlikely to be employed. People with visual impairments, people with hearing impairments. They're all disabled, and so, most companies have very much accepted the fact that they can work in their environments. We're not so lucky yet with people with autism having that same understanding by the company that this disability is not going to interfere with them working. So companies can make their 2 or 3% quota to match whatever government regulation by hiring somebody who's in a wheelchair, somebody who has other impairments, which is fine. Everybody should be employed. But I'm saying it does, that particular thing that has to be met by companies in order to meet their federal contracts, we can't go after very well. I have not been successful in using that as a means. But I don't think companies are afraid of it either.
Yeah, there's an executive order 503 that's requiring government contractors to the threshold is 7% employment of people with disabilities, and it's a wonderful benchmark to set. And again, it comes down from the federal level executive order on down. There's a lot of befuddlement that comes with that. Do people self-disclose who are already working? So there's HIPAA compliance and things like that. So
I would just share one other thing. I think you can hear me. My son was just fortunate enough to get a position, and at the very end of the process, and I think they do. I think they do. But there was a form. Do you have a disability? And he said yes. So
They can't answer that.
it's in the mix.
yeah, it is, and it's
can't
it's
ask it.
tricky.
They can ask all the participants that are applying for a particular job, but they are not required to hire under the ADA. It is going to be the basic requirement of the job.
Yeah,
It's not affirmative action.
I just wanted to share that in the process of this institution, there was a question: do you have a disability? He checked it off. Yes.
But it doesn't have to.
They don't have to until after they're hired
But he
Mhm.
on the application.
Comment on the employer. So it's hard for me to be quiet. I'm sorry. So I'm an HR professional with more than 25 years in HR. I'm sorry.
Sorry. My question to the panel was, as we have individuals who are with autism who are moving towards college, is it beneficial to disclose on your college application? Does anyone have any idea about if that's a negative policy, especially we have very high functioning individuals. We're at the Center for Autism, Colleen and myself. I'm the senior psychiatrist, she's the director. And we have many individuals who are like looking for Ivy League institutions. How is that? When you're going for an Ivy League institution, how is that in terms of disclosure? Should you disclose? Is that going to be a negative or positive, I guess?
Craig, you're in the university system.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to understand the benefit, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the benefit of disclosing during the application process, unless somehow it's part of your personal story that you're conveying in your essays or statements. Once you're admitted, it then becomes a decision about whether or not you want to disclose to the Office of Disabilities Resources and access the services that are available to any individual with a disability. There are, of course, also some colleges that have set up special support programs for individuals with autism. Typically, and I know many of them, I don't know all of them, it's a completely separate process. So your application process, no disclosure is necessary. You apply separately to the autism support
We
program.
have many therapists out there now who are saying that they can help individuals for fees to help push those individuals towards colleges that have these types of programs. Or do you find any benefit to that, or do you think that's pluses or negatives?
My experience, I have a daughter who had it, and I have a son and a grandson with autism. They need the help, but I think it should not be part of the process of getting in. I think that they can get help. There's a lot of agencies out there that can give help without having to necessarily pay. But if somebody can afford it and they want to pay to have some help filling out the applications or whatever, that's fine. That's their right. But I don't think I don't think it helps getting people into the colleges at all,
Yeah.
personally. But I think you need to disclose afterwards and get some help once you're on campus. In order to make it, you're gonna need the help and get the people to do the
Yeah, right, yeah.
accommodations necessary.
Okay.
We're
This,
going to go back to, okay.
I just wanted to make a comment as an employer and even more so as an HR professional or a diversity and inclusiveness professional. We're having these conversations, and I started my career in 1989, so we've been having these conversations for a very, very long time. And I understand it's a catch-22, and I don't want to put anyone in a bad situation where, God forbid, they would lose their job. But I do think from a leadership perspective, to help as a leader to coach you to understand what do you need so you can be successful in your job, there's got to be some way to begin that dialogue. Because employers do want to do the right thing, and we've heard it through everybody's presentation. It's not only the right thing to do; it's the smart thing to do for business. So somehow we have to begin to open up the dialogue. We have to be brave enough as individuals to have the conversation, but coach your manager and almost be your own advocate to help your manager or leader understand what to do in that situation. Because companies do want to hire individuals on every dimension of diversity. I know I represent Ernst & Young, and we're talking about it, as Torkel mentioned, and we're partnered with Towers Watson in the room as well to hire individuals. And I have to tell you, we've been having the conversation since April of last year, and it's like pulling teeth trying to find out where are the people we can hire. I have jobs. We have tons of jobs. And, the team, especially Stern, has been working tirelessly trying to find them, and we can't find them. So, it's a give and take, and we have to figure out how to work together to be able to make it happen.
yeah, I can address that briefly. We've been having that discussion at Columbus for months now. We have a 0 unemployment rate. I've got employers from major companies calling me saying, "Is there something we can work out here?" But I'm dealing with professionals like Joseph, who have been in the business for a long time. I've only been doing this 12 years, but we did have a pretty big aha that as people are accessing these federal and state resources to help them to get into the job market, they often get on a waiting list and they get lost in a black hole. So we need to kind of broaden where we're getting referrals from all the way to the medical side. We have some great programs at the University of Utah working with adults. Again, you have to negotiate through HIPAA and some of those issues, but I think it's, again, going back to all these protections, that in those protections we've also created a black hole where people don't know. Once they get into it, they don't know how to get out of it because it is so complex. And right.
Befuddling is the best word. As an
Mhm.
employer, I've tried to hire veterans,
Mhm.
and it's befuddling.
Yeah.
How do you do it? It's almost impossible as an employer to get in there unless we have these conversations and we make these grassroots connections where we're banging on people's doors, or we're saying, if we're hiring individuals with autism, how do I find them in their basement playing Xbox? Because I
Right.
can't put a posting up that says I'm hiring people with autism. I have to hire
Right.
all people. So it's this really, really difficult and complex
It
challenge
is.
that we have. But
Yeah.
employers do want to do the right thing, and we do want to.
I think there are a lot of agencies like ours whose specific purpose is to help people get jobs. And if we can be notified in a clearer way of job openings and then have someone to communicate with, I think we can have a better job. My problem is every day I get hundreds of inquiries about jobs that are vacant, but no way to go back the other way. If I call, they say, well, yeah, go on a computer and apply. I mean, it goes back to that problem. Another problem I have is that a lot of our children who are graduating, if the parents are at all well off, or if they can afford it, they seem to be comfortable keeping their son or daughter at home for a while with the benefits that they're getting from SSI or SS, and all the things I talked about until they realize, well, they have to get a job. I'm getting a lot of some good people later on. But to answer your question with an employer, my problem is that after somebody says, somebody called last week and said, I have a job for people for data entry or whatever. I said, great, who can I call? Well, go on a computer and apply for the job. If we can get more a way in to talk to people, that's from my perspective as someone that wants to answer your question. Whether it's a veteran, whether it's, we deal with people of all disabilities.
We have a question back there.
I think
Yes,
Craig had an answer. Did Craig have a response? Did you?
Well, I was gonna just add something I'll be real quick about understanding the incentivization to stay at home that's introduced by the existing benefit programs. I think that's relatively. I know you have a lot of experience, Joe, but I think that hasn't been very well studied. The one study that I know of, which focused only on individuals who were in the VR system, so they've already self-selected in.
Mm-hmm.
There was no difference in whether or not they were receiving SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, or Medicare. No influence on whether or not they obtained jobs in one empirical study. It's a selected population, but I think it's an issue that needs further examination. And I'm not sure what the benefit levels are. I think SSI, SSDI in Pennsylvania is $700 a month.
It is, but then by the time you add in the food stamps and the Section 8 housing that you apply for,
Yeah,
you need about $1,200 or $1,300 is what I think a person gets in terms of support. And they need a job that would pay $1,500 to $1,700 a month in order to, with taxes being taken out and so forth, to meet the same amount.
It's an education piece, really. It's benefits counseling for not only the individuals, but for the families as well.
Mhm.
And from what I found from my experience over the years is that the concern is more around what they have to do to fight to get the healthcare piece.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at that amount of money,
Except that today with the Ticket to Work program, people are guaranteed for the next 9 years their health benefits. Social Security, knowing this,
you have the medical assistance for workers with disabilities, and you now have the Affordable Care Act. So if you have appropriate education to individuals and families, it helps to remove that disincentive. And part of the problem we have is we don't have enough individuals that are educated in the intricacies of Social Security and work incentives and how to support people moving forward.
Right.
Because I think we find a lot more individuals ready to take that step where families and individuals educated appropriately.
I agree.
I had another question.
Yes. Well, let me see. I think is it afternoon yet? Yes, it's the
Almost.
afternoon. So good
Yeah.
afternoon. It might be morning somewhere else, but so good afternoon. My name is David Dino Taras, and I am privileged to serve as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. We have 21 district offices statewide, helping individuals with all types of disabilities. I just wanted to share a few comments. It's just a privilege to be here. I get inspired when I come here, and when we can all think about things together. I went blind when I was 19 years old, and I was a sophomore in college. And so I just wanted to just touch on the disclosure question. I'm my personal opinion, and I always just personally disclosed. I show up with my white cane. You know I'm blind, but I'm a firm believer that success is no hocus pocus. It's focus. And I always like to focus on ability. And so as a person with a disability, I would always say, I imagine you're sitting across the desk from me wondering how I use Microsoft Word and how I use Excel. And I explain how my assistive technology, access equals success. When we can help people access the same information as their colleagues, neighbors, classmates, or peers, they can get the same education, they can get the same training, of course, they can get the same jobs. So I would say this is how my screen reader works, and this is how now I can say this is how my iPhone works, and this is how, and I thought it was funny. I just saw a post the other day that the iPhone was just invented 9 years ago, and how that's changed. That's how that's changed things for people with disabilities. It's changed things for everyone, particularly how it's changed things for people with disabilities. So I always like to say, to individuals who I'm working with, our staff and our customers, look, explain what we can do. Explain how the technology does. And some people say, well, hey, maybe if they find out I have a disability, I won't get the job, or if I don't explain it. And I said, well, if you never explain how you can do the job, you're guaranteed not to get it, because someone's sitting across from the desk from you, and they're not a mind reader, and they know very little about disabilities, and they're just wondering how I got in the room, let alone how I'm going to do the job. So it's so important to be able to simply disclose. To Robin from Ernst & Young, my thought to what you were saying is that a network will help eliminate legwork. Being at these events, working with our staff, that the entire network, just being a part of the network, knowing, and I got to tell you how frustrating it is when I get the phone calls and I say, hey, Dave, I got opportunities here, and then I don't have anybody who is really interested in those opportunities, right? And then that employer doesn't call me back. I was a job developer in New Jersey, and when AT&T would call me and say, hey, do you have someone that can help with customer service? And I couldn't fill the job, that job developer would never call me back again, right, Joe? Right? We destroy those relationships. And I also learned that there was 3 people I had to convince when I was a job developer. I had to convince the customer that they could do the job. Yes, you can do it. You got to believe in yourself. Conceive it, believe it, and achieve it. Yes, you can do it. We're going to focus on how to get there, and we're going to focus. So internships, volunteering, so important that people learn with disabilities. When they volunteer, they have the opportunity to go and volunteer. They learn about how to travel. They learn about how to get along with other people. They learn about the technology skills. Then I had to convince the parents. Yes, it's a good idea for your son to work. I would get the phone call, Mr. Dinataris, I heard that you got my daughter a job. Yes, I did. I'm very excited about that. Look, she's not taking it. She can't lose her medical benefits. Her $800 a month for her prescriptions. You going to pay for that? So helping convince the parents that it's a good idea. And of course that we have to convince the employers, and convincing the employers that not the employers who are here, they get it. So but we need for the employers, so it's my job, it's OVR's job to say people with disabilities can work, but we need the employers to say it too. Hey, we've seen it work. This really does work. We've seen it work, and I can give you real life examples. So as there's opportunities for you to share that, please do at events like this and other events that we're going to plan in the future. And I'm going to end where I started. It's a privilege for me to be here, and we're better together. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks.
Well, this is of the nature of tough love. I think that I don't recognize in this group any recognition that you are the smallest part of a much larger problem. First of all, people who are retired, are they going to have a 30-year vacation? I don't think so. I don't think there's enough money to do that. They have to work. How about the kids that drop out of school in the 3rd grade? They have a disability that is much greater than most of them that I hear. And there's a tendency here to compete with each other when there ought to be an integration. There ought to be a recognition, at least, if not an integration or a networking or something of the sort, that otherwise you'll deteriorate into political parties, unionism and all the rest of it, in which you are competing with each other to misrepresent your abilities. Who can gather the greatest sympathy is going to be the criterion for who gets the job. That's wrong, and it shouldn't be allowed to get started.
My response to that, I think, is, in the end, I've been told by a number of employers that they want to do the right thing, but it affects their bottom line. And I think going back to your point is rather than working in silos representing our own missions and our own goals. That really it's a collaboration, and this is what I love about Torkel's model, is it kind of takes you through from beginning to end. But one of the greatest conversations I got to have, and again, this is because I live in Utah and it's a small state, but I had an event a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, and I had the executive director of the Office of Economic Development at the table, the executive director of Division of Services for People with Disabilities, which would be our IDD funding, and the executive director of Vocational Rehabilitation. And they all want to do the right thing, but they didn't quite know how to talk to each other. So I just physically grabbed them and said, okay, you guys are going to talk because you all have resources, you all have influence from the top down and the down back up. And I found that an important dialogue to start this, because some of that really is coming from them integrating some of these models into their own practices and being examples for other people. But sometimes it really is just getting the right people at the table. And we tend to stay focused a lot on social services, and that's one piece, and that's one piece we do very well, right, Joseph? We're really, really good at it. But there's also it's the larger puzzle as well, too. So you know what it is? It's really letting the dandelions start to grow in that nice green grass, and recognizing that they're an important part of that ecology. And I love the dandelion principle, and that really is driving me and some of the work that I'm trying to do in Utah too. But it's just, getting people in the room together and looking at multiple approaches to this, whether it's economic or it's HR function, it's a federal state function, it's a family function. It's some economists talking about it. It's the Federal Reserve looking at policy around employment. It's everybody kind of connecting the dots. So, but you're right. There's a lot of fragmentation in this process as well.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think when employers are out trying to hire people, their job is to hire the most qualified person for the job. And it's my responsibility to present them with a qualified person. I don't think it has to get into, which disability do you have or whatever. It's what are you looking for? And if I know this is the job you want to fill, it's my responsibility to present you with a qualified employee or to have the training programs necessary to get them ready for you, or to work with you to develop the training if you're really having a problem within the employment market, finding a solution to your problem. If you can't find enough people to do data entry, well, maybe we can set up with your company an enclave, a training program, and we can do it. But the bottom line is, the employer wants to hire the most qualified person who's going to stick around with the job, and my job is to give you that qualified person. And I work with veterans. I work with every form of disability. It doesn't make any difference. All I try to do is to give that employer who they need. And as he pointed out from OVR, it is so terrible when you have to tell somebody, I don't have someone for you, because you don't get the call back. It's so true.
So thank you, everyone. We're going to have to wrap up now. But if you want to continue the discussion, there's another bottom line on disabilities in Salt Lake City, another GIC conference on April 1st. There's some other listings on the back of your program of other programs that we're sponsoring, including central banking in Paris, putting housing in context in Sarasota, and a number of other things. So thanks so much for coming. And I think it's very clear that this isn't a charity pursuit. It's bottom line, good business practice, and providing meaningful work for more and more people all the time.
Oh my God, I'm getting old. Pleasure meeting you.
Great to meet you, Jim.